This is a very long title. He is the head of healthcare research, managing director, senior life science analyst at Janie Montgomery Scott. So welcome, Paul.
Thank you. It was really interesting to hear Howard. And since nobody in the room is considering an IPO, let's go. I'll go have a beer. But no, I won't sugarcoat it. And going to raise below $20 million is very hard. And what I'm here is to say that the time the time that it takes to get to that 20 plus level is shorter than it's ever been. So one thing I would advise people is have a contact out there that they can give you the roadmap and say, where do you have to be worth 20 million or 50 million or 100 million? Because it's definitely in the era we're in, you can get there faster than we would have gotten there in 2014 or 20 years ago. And I'll talk about that, but I think that's the thing you need to think about. You can get to this, whether it's IPO or whether it's M&A. M&A does seem to be the choice of CEOs now versus I want to be a public firm. But why are assets worth more faster? I talk about this quite a bit in this presentation, but one is it's a good equity market, it's a good economy. So the market's there and the deal environment's good. The other is, we're in a new era in therapeutics, right? With gene editing and CRISPR, we can now develop a cell and gene therapy so much faster than traditional small molecules. So you can go from beginning to merger or FDA approval much faster. And then the other is cost of capital in the world. I recently did a tour with a bunch of institutional investors to Ireland to visit biological manufacturing facilities. But one of the visits we did was Allied Irish Bank, who said that 1/3 of European sovereign debt yielded a negative yield. So people are just looking for their money back in a 1/3 of European sovereign debt. And the economist at this bank was saying, that's not occurred to that level in 250 years. So the world's looking for growth companies, and that's another reason why the financing environment on the merger side and the equity side is so strong as well. And a little background on us and the region we're in. I'm based in New York, have been for the last 30 years, and most of my career has been public markets. Kind of the other part of the bookshelf is Howard. But, Janie is based in Philadelphia. We have about 120 offices around the United States. We manage $100 billion of private client money. We manage more per financial advisor than anybody. And we're the oldest broker in the United States. But we're only 7 years into the banking side of the business. So we're a little bit like the biotech region of Philadelphia. We should have been there a lot sooner. We should be bigger than we are. And I look at the biotech centers in the United States. What are they? It used to be, meaning where do I go a lot? It used to be San Francisco. Then there's a lot in San Diego. Boston has been a fantastic story in terms of biotech centers. Madison, Wisconsin is a strong center. And Philadelphia, here we are, a corridor of pharmaceutical history, and institutions like CHOP. It's unbelievable. I think we're on that road now, becoming a center, and Janie obviously being headquartered in this region. I hope we participate too. So I think the region shows all the promise of being a great biotech center, and so I hope does our firm participate. This is one slide I'll talk about a little bit in terms of, these are the companies I cover on the public side, but to give you a little bit of idea of why companies can be acquired or go public sooner. I would just give you a couple examples. Thermo Fisher up here, they're generating $600 million a month of free cash flow, and they really would like to spend all of that on acquisitions. So Repligen is another firm I follow in bioprocessing. Up here in Bridgewater, they just acquired C Technologies. Expected to have $30 million at C next year. Repligen paid $240 million for C. So I think that's another example of an entrepreneur needs to know what stage do I have to be at, whether it's clinical trial or revenue to be acquired or be a public entity. I don't have the therapeutic slide up here, but we have biotech, we have specialty pharma coverage as well. And I'm talking to a banker earlier this morning about, I asked him, what's going on the therapeutic side for IPO activity? And he said 89 Bio was started 18 months ago in San Francisco and just raised $89 million in its IPO. So, in this area, is it liver disease, but in cell and gene therapy, it depends. Some of the times the time of liquidity isn't as good. If you're in maybe medical devices, it still takes a little longer. So every sector, every business you're in is going to be a little nuanced, but generally there's some pretty exciting catalysts for liquidity to happen quicker than it would have occurred 10 or 20 years ago. Here we are in IPO windows. We're popular in healthcare today, for example, but nobody liked me in 2012. My sales didn't like me, investors didn't think healthcare was a very good place to be, and yet we're in a great window now. From 2012 to now, the IPO window and financing window is clearly open. And I'll tell you how bad things can get, though. If you look right here in the financial crisis, I recall that in a 6-month period, $87 million was raised in the entire biotech industry in 6 months. And I think that was probably an inside round. And we probably raised $87 million a day the last 3 years. So the window can certainly change depending on the environment. But I think what this chart tells you now is that we're at a fundamentally different period in healthcare, specifically cell and gene therapy and other novel situations that are occurring. Biotech fund flows. You can see that this year, on the right part of the screen, fund flows in biotech, meaning public fund flows, institutional fund flows, have been a little soft. I mean, there's been concerns about how quickly cell and gene therapies are getting commercialized, the cost of cell and gene therapy. But, it's actually been a little better here in the last couple of months. But I would also want to talk about the other investor that's out there for the larger type of rounds, and that is the crossover funds. When I was in the business 10 or 20 years ago, and I was talking to my client at Fidelity, they were buying equity, they were buying public stocks. I would argue that now about 1 out of every 10 of my public investors, they will do crossover. Fidelity, Viking, they all want to do $50 million side pockets of private firms. That's the way they're going to beat the market in addition to being good public investors. So in this market, there is also the activity of crossover funds as well that are pushing up the time to liquidity for the industry. The market, obviously, the more volatile the market, the harder it is to get a deal done. This year's been a little more difficult. It's been a little tougher. Prior to that, your volatility indexes really would say this was a great environment. But, right now, it's been okay recently. And then we've had, the deal market is still open. You can see the little red circles are when we have seen the sell-off days on the indexes of around 200 points. And we've had a lot of that lately with all the news out there regarding, trade barriers, etc. But, the market continues to be okay based on the good economy that we are in. And here's kind of the fundamentals. It's a lot of data up there, but the very top number here is the most important thing. That's 59. the most FDA approvals for therapies in history. So that's kind of what it's all about. That's why the window's open. It's why healthcare is 25% of most public indexes. It's a great time for discovery in the world. And then what's the other nuances? If you look at the path we track, which is monoclonal antibodies, you know, this is the old era of biotech, 4 or 5 years ago, when monoclonals grew on prescriptions 1.5%. Now they're growing around 20%. The other major nuance to that data up there is that 20% of approvals last year were biologics. This year we're tracking at around 30% of approvals are biologics. So we're in this era ahead of us where more and more of the 1.2 trillion of annual therapeutic sales are becoming biologic type molecules. So it's a long way to go before biologics make up even half of global therapeutic sales. But that's the underlying excitement behind that data of record approvals. All of this success breeds more deal activity and more success by venture capital stage firms. And I would, you know, what we're hearing today is, of course, these deals are getting larger. The 2 bullet points up top, the average deal size up to 14 was 27. Now the average deal size is around 60 million. With that said, you know, what I would really conclude with in terms of this robust environment is that I would say 3 things in terms of what I've heard from these speakers and my personal experience. You know, I've been involved in M&A transactions. I've also been involved in the process of raising angel funding for companies, and we all know how difficult that can be. On the angel side first, I would say that you need to find a regional VC. People like to, you know, the investors like to invest with a local company. It's similar to get there. They know the word of mouth, the quality of the firm. So you want to go to a regional VC if you can. I like the family office idea a lot. A decision maker who's experienced in healthcare, like the speaker we saw earlier. Instead of you going to a tech investor, go to a, you know, family office can make that decision faster. The other is the seed organizations, I agree. And I'd like to hear, you know, I think later on, Howard, love to ask him about, you know, there's a term called Golden Seed, which is very active now for businesses that are owned by women, and there's one of the more active angel seed groups in the United States, I've heard as well. And then, you know, friends and family can make a decision quicker, but I think the time and, you know, getting the decision maker to be your angel is key. It just takes so long, who knows, if you take the traditional tack of just going to the traditional VCs. I would say the second thing I would conclude with is, you know, the time to funding is faster, as I mentioned. We have a lot of M&A activity driven in the tools sector. The therapeutics sector is very active because you can be commercial faster. And then the third thing, and I wrap it up with, is saying that you need to contact somebody that you know, whether it's my firm on the banking side, or a Cowan, a Leerink. If you're in healthcare, there's about 12 firms you want to talk to. And you want to establish a relationship with that person and say, what do I have to be, whether it's what stage or what's my revenue level, to be worth 50 million or be worth this 20 million plus value, where it's easier to get the financing. I think that would be the one thing I'd walk away with. And that changes. You know, I would have told a diagnostics firm 3 years ago, you don't have a chance. Now I would say if you're helping administer the right therapeutic, your window's back and it's open. So I think you can't sit there as an entrepreneur and say, you have to have an idea of what your goal needs to be relative to people that are always in the equity markets, public equity markets, such as myself. So I think that would help you set your guideposts, get that intelligence network on the public side as well. So I'll wrap that up there.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
Oh, you're giving me that back? Yeah, thank you. We have time for a few questions for Paul.
So when you look at the IPO market going forward, you've seen companies stay private longer historically, but recently due to private funding valuations going up, and IPOs themselves have not performed overly well, very down significantly, for example. How do you see 2020 playing out in 2021 relative to the IPO market continue to stay relatively strong with the looming elections and the races?
That's the question that everybody has their own opinion on in this room, is who's going to win the election and what's that going to do to the market. Our strategist would tell you that if Elizabeth Warren wins, we have a downside on 15% on the market. But, you know, everybody has their opinion on what the equity markets may or may not do. Right now, the markets are acting fabulous, and, you know, the economy in the United States is very strong. You know, and then more specifically in healthcare, you know, are we achieving commercial traction with these approved gene and cell therapies? You know, Yescarta and Kymriah are actually gaining traction now, and that's helping get this cell and gene therapy market back on the IPO track. So I would say right now, you know, things look pretty good for the market on capital raising in general and healthcare specifically.
Do you think we're going to see like starting continuing through the election, or do you think the window's going to tighten over the next 6 months?
I think
I don't put the box over it.
I think that, you know, we all know what happens in an election year. You know, it's going to get tight somewhere around May through September. You know, even though you end up with a blowout win by somebody, it always gets a little restricted right there.
Great. Any more questions in the back?
What's the minimum threshold these days for being practically, from a practical standpoint, for an IPO raise?
40 million.
Great. Any other questions? Well, big thank you to all of our speakers. I'm going to go ahead and